Hey there guys. So Ben Tran here, walking to work for my first day on the job as a fresh intern. This is a night shift, which is actually a really interesting shift to start on. Just coming in, so I'm going in at 6 p.m. right now. Gonna get off at 6 a.m. Let's see how it goes. So this is the machine to get our scrubs. So basically we just use our badge and do this. And then so it's already pre-recorded with the scrubs that we want. So just give me some number and then I just go to door 5. Open this. And then get my scrubs. This is the machine that we use to actually put our scrubs away. And then you can clean it every single day so that you don't go home with dirty scrubs. I want to give you a quick tour of the room, actually, for my call room. So behind me, I have a computer and also our phone, as you can see here. And it's really important that we have these things because if a patient needs something and the nurse pages us in the middle of the night, we're able to actually just wake up, go quickly over to the computer, and we don't actually have to go out of the room to go check up on a patient, for example, if we could do everything remotely. And then behind me is the bed, which is a little bit on the smaller side, but you know, what can you do? And then behind me over here is our bathroom. And this is the best part about this room is this 1980s fan to, you know, really just show you the vintageness of this room. Basically, the job as a night float is to make sure that the patients stay stable overnight and that there's no severe decompensation or any issues that happen. And a lot of times, you know, we get paged overnight for patients' issues. And so right now, I am currently covering about 42 patients, which means that I get sign out. So sign out is essentially whenever, you know, the patients, so sign out is basically whenever the attendings and the residents eventually go home, so they have to sign off their patients or hand them off to me. So that basically just means that they give me an introduction to the patient, what's going on, things that I need to know overnight. So like if the patient is a watcher, for example, that just means that we need to make sure that we keep a close eye on them versus a patient that's stable. So like that patient's gonna be okay overnight. So for the most part, we get sign out, and then that typically takes about an hour depending upon how long it takes and how complicated the patients are. And then typically that takes me until about like 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. And then typically then I have a long list of to-dos. So every single patient can have a to-do. And that's basically just us keeping track of what the patient needs. So for example, if a patient just had a procedure and they just started to eat food again, we may need to make sure that they're not like choking or having any issues. So that's the job of the night float, is just make sure that all the patients are okay. There's a lot of things though that can happen that kind of disrupt this normal rhythm of what night float is. So for example, if a patient codes or if they have a cardiac arrest, we need to respond. We need to be able to look through our current records that we have. And so it's really important to have a really good sign off or a really good handoff, because you need to actually understand in general, what all these 42 patients are doing. And so in med school, we used to carry about 3 to 4 patients, but now I'm carrying 42 patients. And so it's certainly a really big difference there, and it could be really hard. But it's actually doable. You get better with it over time. I will say that it's really hard in the beginning because you just don't know what the medical conditions are. You don't really have that pattern recognition yet, but over time you get better at it. And so that's a really big learning process. And for me, I was always learning. So it's also really important to think about who's on the team for a night float. So it depends on the hospital, but for me here, I actually have one senior medical resident who kind of helps me oversee the day-to-day for my patients. And then there's also a hospitalist attending who is graduated after residency and helps us with some other tasks. Particularly for me, actually, there's not as much supervision, which is surprising, but I think it helps a lot to develop a sort of independence as we grow as physicians. So that's really fun. But it's also really scary at the same time, because when I first started out, which is about a few days ago now, I wasn't really familiar with the hospital kind of electronic medical record, or the EMR, and so I didn't really know how to put in orders, or what order to put in, whether or not to put in potassium as IV or PO as oral, and how much to give and what buttons to press. So that's been certainly a really fun and not so fun thing to learn how to do. But in addition to the senior medical resident and also the senior attending, there's other people that we work with, so nighttime nurses and such as nighttime nurses, and they've been really helpful, and they are actually the key to what makes a hospital run. And so it's really important to get a good relationship with your nurses. A nurse just called me to talk about a patient that didn't receive her medications in the morning, and that's really important to know, because that kind of determines how we treat that patient for the rest of the day. And if her blood pressure spikes, we need to know why. And so that nurse has that key information, because we're at the bedside every single day of the patient, whereas we're not necessarily at the bedside all the time. So it's really important to develop those key relationships with those nurses. Let's go through a few of the tools that we used while we're on night float. Number one is the cell phone. So this is our work phone. So if anything happens, they could call us pretty quickly. But the bad thing about this phone is that there's not always reception. So right now I'm in the basement, which is basically our call room. And I am only on Wi-Fi and I have no cellular reception. So if they need to call me, they can't reach me. That's why they have this. This is our pager, which looks super old, and I honestly didn't even know how to use this when I first got it, and still kind of don't really know how to use it. So basically, oh wait, I got a page. Oh crap, should probably respond to that. So basically, this helps us. It's basically like texting. We would get texts on this, and then rather than being able to text them back, because as you can see, there's not really a keyboard on this thing, we actually have to just call them on the phone. So they typically send us their phone number to call back, and then a little message about a patient, like a patient needs a medication or a patient didn't eat their food. So we could call them back. So, and if we do need to make a call and we have no reception within the hospital, we could actually use this. So this is basically just our hospital phone that is actually workable anywhere throughout the hospital, and it's really nice and convenient. But there's a lot of tools or just devices that we use, just this pager, this phone, and then my phone, and then the personal phone. So there's just a lot of things. But luckily we have a white coat and you have scrubs, so there's plenty of pockets that you could put this in. One of the things that I never really thought about when I was studying to become a doctor or studying in med school is that you're always learning. And so I always thought that, once I became a doctor, I'd be done. I wouldn't have to open another book, or I wouldn't have to, learn as hard or study as hard as I did in med school or college. But surprisingly so, it's actually not the case. I'm actually studying every single day, even in residency, and probably as an attending, I'll probably be studying every single day. I have this book right here, which is USMLE Step 3 Secrets. And so we have to take our boards, which is basically just some tests to make sure that we are fulfilling the criteria of medical knowledge. And so I have that even when I'm in residency. So I have to be studying on the side. So basically I would go home even after a long day, and I would have to read about my patients, like if they have like a congestive heart failure, I have to learn how to treat that. And then I also have to learn how to pass this test. And hopefully, and the thought is that if we are doing well in the wards or in the hospital, then that kind of knowledge base will translate over into passing this test. And so we'll see if that's actually the case for me. But it's really important to think about, how are we learning and how is learning different? So it's really important to think about how is learning different now compared to before. So in college, I would, study a lot, sometimes often cram, and that wasn't always that helpful, but in college, that got me by. And then now in med school, or before in med school, I was a little bit better with my studying habits. I tried to really focus on studying the material the day of and then the day after, just to make sure that it's really solidified in my brain. And now it's a lot of learning on the go. I have to learn how to treat CHF patients, have to learn how to kind of triage cases that come up with like heart failure, cardiac arrest, or if the patient has like a cardiac arrhythmia, and not anything that just related to the heart. Like we have a lot of patients have blood loss, and so it's really easy to think about it from a paper perspective. So just thinking about a patient on the paper, whenever you're going through a question like this patient just has blood loss, we need to do this, this, and this. But whenever you're in the moment, it's really hard, because if you see that their blood pressure is dropping, or if you see that their hemoglobin's dropping and they're anemic, you start to really, really worry. And that could get scary sometimes. But it's nice to have backup around. But it's always, on you to be learning as much as you can whenever you're in medicine. Due to going through the rest of my day, I typically sign out around 7 to 8, and then I do my to-do lists. And then typically I will get some pages throughout the night, just patients asking to put back on CPAP, or if they have some home meds that they need to be put back on, or if there's some sort of medication error that we need to address, or sometimes patients don't even want to take their medication. So I need to go up to the bedside and see if why they're not taking their meds, and also if I can help the nurse staff get the patient to take their meds. And sometimes it's really easy to talk to the patient. Sometimes, they just don't want to take their meds because they don't understand what the medication's for, or if they just don't want to take the medications because they think that they're taking too many. So it's really important to explain to the patients why they're getting the medications, like, Mr. Johnson, this is to help you with your shortness of breath. And so sometimes that's just enough to get the patients to feel comfortable with taking their medications. And it's really important that sometimes they just want to talk to somebody. Like I've sat in the room sometimes and just sat and talk with them for about 10 to 15 minutes and just kind of listen to their concerns. And that sounds easy, but in actuality, that 10 to 15 minutes is time that you could be doing something else with another patient, or if something urgent needs to come up, and if your beeper goes off or your pager goes off. And so those times are really crucial to really spend with those patients if you can. So it's about 4 a.m. I was woken up and got a page by a nurse regarding a patient that had developed some chest pain that was concerning for a potential cardiac MI or heart attack. And so I was able to actually access his records inside the computer that we have in our call room, and kind of get a general sense of what's going on, looking through his vitals, and also getting a great history from the nurse. They're a really good resource whenever we have these patients, because they are the patient's bedside, and they're right there, so they're able to actually get a better history and really get to understand what the patient was experiencing at the time. So I just got back from actually seeing the patient, and just ordered an EKG, and I've been waiting for those results, and hopefully we'll get those back soon. I called the cardiology fellow who's on call. So these fellows are around the hospital, and similar to us, they're always on call. So if we have any concerns, we could reach out to them. So I contacted the fellow, and they suggested that we get another EKG to just look at what's going on, and also to order some troponins, which are tests that we use to actually look for a heart attack. And so those are blood tests that we can actually track to see if over time there is an increase in this value. It indicates that there are some cardiac cells that are dying and releasing this. So we're going to trend those to see if he is having those values increase. And then if he needs to, we would actually get something called a cardiac cath, which is a test that is invasive. It uses typically a dye, and we can go in and we can look to see if there's any obstruction of his coronary arteries that would give him a heart attack. So we're working on that, and also having some other pages come in about patients that are going through alcohol withdrawal and may need some medication for that. So it's busy time, and it's almost time for checkout or sign out. And so we're just going to try to wrap up with these patients before the night's over.
Hey guys, so it's about 7 a.m. going home now. Just gave sign out to the other co-interns of mine. Just throughout the night we had a few other pages, just some small kind of trivial things about some patients that needed some pain meds and also their CPAP machines. But also we had a patient that had NSVTs, which are non-sustained ventricular tachycardia, which can be very deadly if it's sustained, which would be VTAC or VFib. And that's the really dangerous one that we would trigger a cardiac code for. But these patients luckily were asymptomatic and so didn't require any intervention. So that means I get to go home now. So that's it for tonight, and then I'll be back tomorrow.